My name is Jason Thompson. I taught social studies classes for 10 years. In that time, I challenged my students to always look at things from multiple perspectives and get outside of their own comfort zone. I challenged them to debate meaningfully, to look at viewpoints that aren't their own, to back up what they say, and they ended up in a world like this.
Our press secretary gave alternative facts to that.
Just being stomped on and had the windows kicked out.
In all honesty, I watched teenagers, 17, 18 years old, sometimes even 14, 15-year-olds, have more cogent debates than what I'm currently seeing out there. This video and the others that I put on this YouTube channel are an attempt to have meaningful conversation because I know it can happen at all ages. This video is about a phrase that I keep seeing pop up in the media all the time. The phrase is identity politics. It doesn't matter if you're talking about Democrats, it doesn't matter if you're talking about Republicans, it just seems to be what is being discussed with respect to how politics are framed these days. The funny thing is the context in which these are written as if it's something that's new in American politics. So when did it begin? If I crack open a history book, when do I see that political parties started catering to people based on their identities, whether that be their skin color, their religion, or anything? And the answer is, it starts with this guy, our third president, Thomas Jefferson. Blame him for a lot of the arguments we still have today, because when he started the party that was called then the Democratic Republicans, which is actually now the current Democratic Party, it was founded on one primary principle, the principle of states' rights, that states get to determine a lot of things about what Americans have to deal with and live with, as opposed to the federal government in Washington, D.C. So how is that possibly about identity politics, right? Southern states wanted to maintain slavery. They wanted to make sure that they didn't have the federal government or the northern states getting into their own states' affairs that were there. So the whole marriage of the concept of states get to determine what is right, as it played through fugitive slave laws, as it played through the Kansas-Nebraska Act, as it played through lots of different issues that led up to the Civil War, it very much is hand in hand with white aristocracy. All you had to do was say states' rights. The South got something that they wanted out of it, and it absolutely played to the identity of people in that part of the country. So then when did it start with the current Republican Party? Well, kind of right at the origin of it. The modern Republican Party was literally founded on the premise of eradicating slavery. Clearly, that is playing to the identity of another portion of the population in this country. Abraham Lincoln was the first president out of that party, and of course they did succeed in eradicating slavery and eventually setting up the Emancipation Amendments. So again, why is everybody acting like this is such a big deal with our political parties these days? Of course they play to people's identities. They always have. And it's for a very simple reason. That's how this country was invented. It was created around organizing people by their identities. That's what slavery was about. That's what segregation was eventually about. And we are still absolutely living in those patterns today. The parties have picked their own target audiences, and of course they play to those identity politics because that's how we're organized. Now, if you pay attention at all to modern Republicans and Democrats, you'll notice that those two platforms that I set up from the beginning, that they historically began with, have completely flip-flopped. So when did that happen? The modern Democratic Party really got its roots under FDR, with the fact that after the Great Depression, he changed the Democratic Party to essentially be the party that does something to intervene itself in the lives of Americans to try to make it better. Now, that by itself, not identity politics, but stick with me, because you're going to see how that led to it for the Democrats. By the election of 1956, you're going to notice something about the way America votes. It was pretty much the South and everyone else. The solid South stuck to its states' rights mantra with the Democratic Party, aka the Dixiecrats back then, but after the Great Depression, Americans were looking for people and politicians that were going to actually do something to better the lives of Americans that was coming from the federal government, not necessarily the state. But with the Democratic Party weakened and not having enough people to vote for them, along came a candidate that changed them forever.
This nation was founded by men of many nations and backgrounds. It was founded on the principle that all men are created equal, and that the rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened.
Did you see it? Identity politics. Talking to all of those that had never really achieved the rights in this country, and of course the voting bloc that typically voted Republican because they were the party that eradicated slavery, now switched primarily over to the Democrats after John F. Kennedy. JFK really is the beginning of the modern Democratic Party. So what about all those Dixiecrats in the South? What are they going to do? Because they clearly don't have a party anymore. And as we all know, during the 50s and the 60s, there was a huge fight to try to maintain segregation and keep things the way that they'd been for so long. Well, they tried a third party option, and here's what it looked like.
Today, I have stood where once Jefferson Davis stood and took an oath to my people. It is very appropriate that from this cradle of the Confederacy, this very heart of the great Anglo-Saxon Southland, in the name of the greatest people that have ever trod this earth, and I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Some Americans kept picking Democrats, some Americans kept picking Republicans. The South tried to go its own route, but at the end of the day, they couldn't garner enough votes at the federal level to have any impact on the states. Identity politics just were not working for these guys the way that they used to. So what do? How do they get back on the national stage with a political party that's out there? Better question. Is there a political party that wants the South? Along comes Richard Nixon and what he called his Southern strategy to try to get the Southern states into the Republican Party voting base. That decision coupled that portion of the country with the Republican Party ever since. The fact is that out of the Nixon administration, policy was invented that directly targeted African American communities, see war on drugs, and were used as ways to continue to persecute people that had traditionally been persecuted in this country. So needing to leverage the identity politics for the South, the Republican Party now has to come up with a platform that's going to cater to that white majority. So there you have it. The 1960s made our current political parties. The Democrats sell themselves as the party that is trying to do something about institutional discrimination. The Republican Party just was trying to win again, and they knew that they needed the South to do it. And they put together a coalition of people from the South and other parts of Middle America. Now, with that setup, think about the changing demographics in the United States. Coming into the year 2000, you have a much higher Latino population. You have a growing portion of African Americans in this country. You have the white majority. It's still there, but getting smaller and smaller as a percentage all the time. So does it really surprise anyone that a group that has always been in control in this country is now about to be outnumbered, and you start seeing race and prejudice and bigotry resurface on a grand scale in politics again, no longer as subtle as it once was with legislation such as the war on drugs? And so who are these people that are currently in government that are essentially throwbacks to what politics we thought used to be, but is making a resurgence in the transition that America's going through with our demographics? Let's start with a Republican and our current Attorney General.
However, one of Mr. Reagan's nominees is in trouble in Washington, in trouble for saying that the NAACP is a pinko organization, and that a white civil rights attorney from his home state of Alabama is a disgrace to his race.
These comments that you could say about a commie organization or something, I may have said something like that in a general way that probably was wrong.
And of course, Jeff Sessions is not exactly the anomaly here. Let's just look at that picture of Republicans celebrating prematurely what they thought was going to be the new healthcare bill. Look at that diversity. And an image like that absolutely plays to the identity politics of the South and the Middle American populations. So it's pretty easy to see how the Republican Party has decided to cater to white majority populations in the United States. Now, on the other hand, the Democratic Party has openly excluded those populations. For example, when discussing those that are supporting Donald Trump, after Donald Trump has addressed, rightfully so, that the Democratic Party has forgotten some white communities throughout the middle of America and in some of the real true blue-collar places of our workforce, the candidate responded like this.
You could put half of Trump supporters into what I call the basket of deplorables.
Now, the problem with that is that the candidate represents a party that has decided to target exclusively on groups that have been slighted in the past, and kind of forgot a platform that goes along with the majority of the country. To paraphrase Will McAvoy, if liberals are so smart, how come they lose so often? If you don't get the reference, Google Newsroom, you'll love it. So look, the topic is identity politics, and again, each side is pointing the finger at the other saying, you engage in identity politics and it's dividing America. Look, every party does it. Every party has always done it. It is as American as apple pie, and it is not the party's fault. I repeat, it is not the party's fault. The parties are merely a reflection of the country that was created by separating itself by race, by religion. And as much as our principles state we shouldn't do that, we as a country have always been that way. So can we just stop pretending and have an honest conversation that politicians always cater to people based on their perspective, which in this country is inextricably linked to the skin color that they have. If we're being honest, skin color impacts the life that Americans will lead, and it's always been that way. And of course, religion is the other side of the main identity politics being played by one of the parties, because coming out of the losses of the 1960s and the 70s, in order to get their voting base back, they inextricably linked themselves with the majority religion in this country. And of course, the parties have always played to identity politics in some form. This just happens to be the way that it is right now. The difference also is people are sick of political correctness, as we've seen through the popularity of one candidate, and they're asking to just stop being dishonest about the way that things are. People don't necessarily want things to change, they just want to be honest about the way that it is, and that's what I'm hoping for in the debate. I mean, we need to be honest about the behavior of our politicians, the president in particular. We need to be honest about the fact that if I want some of the small business principles that go along with the Republican Party in its current form, I also have to pick a platform that is discriminating openly against people in this country. With respect to the Democrats, I have to then be honest about the fact if I want to go along with democratic principles and ideals, I have to acknowledge the fact, honestly, that they are excluding the large majority of this country from their platform, and that's why they've lost the presidency, Congress, the Supreme Court, most of the governorships, and most state legislatures in this country. So when we see a politician doing this,
would you just say unequivocally you condemn them and you don't want their support?
Well, I have to look at the group. I mean, I don't know what group you're talking about. You wouldn't want me to condemn a group that I know nothing about. I'd have to look. If you would send me a list of the groups, I will do research on them, and certainly I would disavow if I thought there was something wrong. But you may have groups in there that are totally fine, and it would be very unfair. So give me a list of the groups, and I'll let you know.
Okay. I mean, I'm just talking about David Duke and the Ku Klux Klan here, but...
I don't know, honestly, I don't know David Duke. I don't believe I've ever met him. I'm pretty sure I didn't meet him, and I just don't know anything about him.
And when a candidate can't even disown the Klan, you know he's getting them on their side, and they're telling you that's who they're voting for.
We are determined to take our country back. We're going to fulfill the promises of Donald Trump. That's what we believed in. That's why we voted for Donald Trump, because he said he's going to take our country back.
So can we just be honest that the Republican leaders that are in charge want votes the way all politicians want votes, and they're not afraid to even cater to people like David Duke and his followers? And while that is an example of how you cater to a predominantly white population, here's an example, while we're being honest, about how you turn off predominantly white communities in this country.
Because we're going to put a lot of coal miners and coal companies out of business.
The blue-collar workforce in this country has felt like the Democratic Party has been out of touch with it for quite some time, and comments like that are why Democrats keep losing. So how do I turn off predominantly white populations talking about religion?
So it's not surprising then that they get bitter and they cling to guns or religion or antipathy towards people who aren't like them.
That is identity politics. He may not be overtly saying I want to upset some white people and predominantly white populations in the country, but that's exactly what he did. So let's do identity politics in a much more honest way.
I want to ask you about comments you made about the judge in the Trump University case. You said that you thought it was a conflict of interest that he was the judge because he's of Mexican heritage, even though he's from Indiana.
Fine. This judge is of Mexican heritage. I'm building a wall, okay? I'm building a wall. I am going to do very well with the Hispanics, the Mexicans,
So
everybody.
no Mexican judge could ever be involved in a case that involves you?
He's a member of a society where, very pro-Mexico, and that's fine. It's all fine. But
Except that you're calling into question
he
his
should
heritage.
recuse himself.
Because he's
Then
Latino.
you also say, does he know the lawyer on the other side? I mean, does he know the lawyer? A lot of people say
But I'm
yes.
not
I don't
talking
know.
about that. I'm
Well,
talking
no,
about
that's another problem.
But you're invoking his race when talking
Here's
about
what
whether
I'm
or not
saying.
he can do his job.
Jack, I'm building a wall, okay? I'm building a wall. I'm trying to keep business out of Mexico. Mexico's fine. There's nothing...
But he's American. He's an American.
He's of Mexican heritage, and he's very proud of it, as I am where I come from, my parents.
But he's an American. You keep talking about...
Jake.
It's a conflict of interest because of Mexico.
Are you ready?
That is what you call racism, at least if we go by the actual definition of the word racism.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
That is what you call bigotry, at least if you go by the actual definition of the word. The discourse in this country is having difficulty because a lot of people just can't be honest with the situation that is taking place. Politicians have, of course, played identity politics for years, and it's always been that way. It just so happens that at this time in history, we have an openly prejudicial and bigoted group running the White House and a Congress that is turning a blind eye to it, and we can't have an honest conversation if we don't call a spade a spade. And it's getting harder to defend, because the definitions are the definitions, and the examples are crystal clear. There are many out there that are trying to defend the actions of this administration as somehow not being racist or prejudicial. But they know it is. And the cracks are starting to show. Isn't that right, Fox News?
I am so uncomfortable having this conversation. And that's what this woman said before this, because I know what's in my heart. And I know that I don't think anyone is different, better, or worse based on the color of their skin. But I feel like there is nothing any of us can say right now without being judged.
Everybody seems to judge everybody for which party or which label they decide to wear in this country, which is why I try to exclude myself from as many labels as I possibly can. The fact is that you don't need to feel judged if you're just honest about the situation. Our current two-party system is not set up to be a broadly represented organization. They pick groups to cater to, and those groups have always been at odds with each other because there is no group out there advocating for everybody. Politics and how it caters to us based on our identity, we have to dissect the system that is there and try to figure out how to get something that is better, because clearly this system isn't working properly. Would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I'm going to keep this up because honestly I can't watch the news without screaming at the TV, so I'm going to scream at my webcam for a little bit. Hope you engage in the conversation.